Welcome to Influenced, a book lovers podcast hosted by book besties Tegan and Amanda.
Here at Influenced, we cover books that we have been influenced to read thanks to the internet, as well as books that have influenced us. If you haven't read the book yet, no worries. The first portion of each episode starts with a spoiler-free overview. There will be adequate warning before we get into too much detail.
This podcast will talk about books ranging in age demographics, including adult content. Plus, we've been known to swear a time or two, so keep that in mind in case you have others around you. With that said, we are so happy you're here.
We were influenced to read The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab, which was released in 2020 by Tor Books. It is available in hardback, paperback, and digital formats. It is just over 150,000 words, which is approximately 448 pages in its hardback version. As much as fans would love to see another book released in a series with this, V.E. Schwab has said she has no intention to write another book. She intentionally left it open-ended so fans could decide the ending for themselves.
I am very sad about that fact.
I know. I would love to read more about this world and the characters. We might have a movie adaptation. It was announced in 2021 that there was an adaptation in the works, but we don't have a date set for that yet.
That could be a very interesting film adaptation. Makes me a little nervous for a film adaptation version of it, but any book to film makes me nervous.
Yeah, I agree with that. There's always so much that goes into it and required to make it successful.
Yeah. I'm just thinking also of like the time frames. Now, if somebody was to tell me that this book was to become a TV show, like a short series, like limited series TV show, like on Netflix or something, I would be down for that.
Yes, absolutely.
I think the format of this book would fit a TV show much better.
I agree with you on that. Do you want to give us a quick synopsis about what this book is about?
I absolutely would love to give a short synopsis of this. And this is a spoiler-free synopsis of it, so don't worry, I'm not going to give anything away here. But The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue follows Addie, who is a young woman in the early 18th century France, who is desperate to escape her small town and her arranged marriage that she was able to put off until about 23 years old. So she made a bargain to live forever and is cursed to be forgotten by everyone she meets. Terrible, right? Just terrible. Then everything changes 300 years later when she meets Henry, who remembers her at a New York City bookstore.
Addie LaRue is a character-driven book written from second-person perspective. The timeline switches back and forth between when Addie was a young child and when she made this deal initially in the early 1700s and current day, which is 2013, 2014. As the book progresses, these timelines catch up to each other and sort of merge.
So we like to rate our books. Tegan, do you want to give our listeners a little overview about our rating system? Because I know rating systems can vary person to person.
That's a good thing to clarify. So we both have a similar star format. 5 stars, it's a great read that we would read again. And any criticisms are small, most likely based on our personal preferences. A 4-star rating means we enjoyed it, would likely read it again, but there were some issues that were worthy of a deduction. 3 stars means it was just meh. If we give it 2 stars, we really didn't like the book. There were glaring issues with both the plot and characters. And finally, 1-star review, you're probably not going to hear us discuss that on here because if it's that low, we probably didn't finish it. So with that said, Amanda, what did you rate this book?
So I have to be completely transparent that this is my 3rd time reading this book. The first time, even the second time I read this book, I rated it 5 out of 5. Loved it because the first time I read it, it was, the new read. I didn't know what was going to happen, and I was immersed into it completely. The second time I read it was probably a year and a half later, and I'll be honest, I have the memory of a gnat, which is why I reread books a lot. However, this time I rated it 4 out of 5. It's still a phenomenal book and love it, but I do feel like it had some pacing issues, particularly in the first half of the book, that it was a little slow, dragged on a little bit, and I would have liked to see some interactions happening earlier in the book. What about
Yeah.
you?
So this was my second time reading this book. I first read it at the end of 2021, so it's been just over 2 years since my first read through. Initially, it was a 5 out of 5 for me as well. And I have dropped my rating to 4 stars after the second read through. I agree that there were some issues with the pacing. In my opinion, I still think it's worth the hype that it's gotten. Overall, it was a really enjoyable read. Just some minor things that I felt were worthy of a deduction.
I would agree with that. I still say it is completely worth the hype. It is a great book. And the deductions that I think we're throwing on there are more personal preference things in terms of the pacing because this is not a new read for us, but we knew that this would be such a good book to dive into for the first episode. If you really liked this book, there might be some similar reading recommendations that would be a good fit for you. Unfortunately, I don't have any reading recommendations that fit this kind of genre and category, but Tegan does have a couple great ones.
So, if you enjoyed reading The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, a couple other books that I would recommend are The Midnight Library by Matt Haig, particularly if you liked the element of exploring a different reality or how life could be played out differently. The other book I would recommend is Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel. This one is actually a sci fi novel. I recommend this if you like the aspect of art continuing on throughout time, because that is a big theme in Station 11.
Well, Tegan, thank you for those recommendations because I tend to like what I like and I get stuck in it. And this is going to be a great way for me to expand my palette. I really like the idea of a Midnight Library. I have seen that everywhere, so I'm excited to give that a try.
This will
Oh,
be a good way for me to expand my palette too, because I know that you're going to make me read books I wouldn't read so that we
I
can cover them in
know.
the podcast.
I know. There's some books coming up in the next few episodes that I am really excited for you to read. So, with that said, this is the point of the podcast where our journey together goes more into a deep dive of the story. So, this is your spoiler warning. If you have not read The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, now is your time to either stop listening if you don't want any spoilers, or if you are the type of person who doesn't mind spoilers, maybe doesn't plan to read the book and would love to know more about it with a spoiler ending, by all means, continue listening on. We would love to have you on this journey with us.
So, just in case you didn't catch that, spoiler warning. Now is your time to stop listening if you don't want spoilers. If it's been a while since you've read this book, or you haven't read it but you're sticking around because you don't mind spoilers, here's a quick refresher of Addie's situation. She feels very trapped. She's 23, early 1700s, France. The only value that she can contribute to the society that she lives in is to get married, to have a family. And she wants so much more than that for herself. So, in a desperate situation, right before she is supposed to go to the altar and get married, she runs away. So she starts praying to any god who will answer her. Time slips away and it gets dark. The danger of praying after dark is that the gods of the darkness answer, and they all require a hefty price. Luke answers, and he offers her a life of like total freedom. But the price she has to pay for that is that she will not be remembered by anyone she encounters. She can live as long as she wants with this freedom and trade her soul to him when she's bored of it, basically. So, for 300 years, she cannot speak her name, write, or do anything to leave a mark. She makes a couple attempts throughout the book to leave a mark, but everything returns to its original form within seconds. Her face doesn't turn out in photographs. She can't see her reflection. She obviously can't work because no one can remember her. And you can't just show up at a job where people don't know you. Oh, she resorts to thievery. She learns to lie. And we see her character kind of evolve over this. And she desperately seeks love throughout this novel. But how do you find love from someone who forgets you as soon as they close their eyes to go to sleep or a door closes between you? So she goes on multiple dates with the same person. For her, she's getting to know this person more and more over time. But for them, it's like each date is like they're meeting her for the first time. And we see this thematically throughout the book. She does this with Toby, Sam, Max, Remy, Mateo, and so on and so on and so on until she meets Henry in 2014. So Henry's the first person able to remember Addie in 300 years. We learn that it's because he also made a deal with Luke. His deal was to be loved by everyone, to be seen as enough. So the people he interacts with see exactly what they want when they look at him. Addie's not affected by Henry's curse because what she wants, to be loved and to be remembered, has nothing to do with Henry. So Addie and Henry fall in love or in a situationship that is for you to determine. This book ends with Addie saving Henry. His deal was to last 1 year, and then he would sacrifice his soul. To save him, Addie renegotiated her deal with Luke and agreed that if he let Henry out of his bargain and allowed Henry to remember her, then she would stay with Luke as long as he wanted her by his side. And those words were very carefully crafted by our girl Addie and become important later when we start theorizing.
I love this book. It's just tragically beautiful, and the character change of Addie from the beginning all the way to the end, like, that was just drastically different, right? In the beginning, we see Addie just, she never intended for that to be her consequence by any means, and she's so desperate for him to undo what he did and is constantly trying to beg him and change this deal. And by the end of it, she, kind of embraces it, and she changes so much that she just takes it all in stride and is so much more cunning and takes all the lessons that she's learned in 300 years. And oh God, I loved it so much. So we thought it would be a fun idea to describe the three main characters in 3 words. With that said, my 3 words for Addie were charismatic, wild, and caring. I had some other words in mind, but those were the 3 that really came to mind, especially charismatic. By the time, as she goes along, she has to really, like, kind of make an influence on these people in her short term of them knowing her, and I thought it was fun. What about you, Tegan? What were your 3
Yeah,
words for Addie?
nice. I like that. You're right. She had to be very charismatic. My 3 words were curious, determined, and protective.
Okay, okay. I
Yeah.
can see those. So for Henry, I put, and I'm gonna be the first to be honest here. I don't love Henry. I don't. He's fine. He's not bad. He's just not great either. And I think Tegan, this is where you and I might differ throughout the book, is our love of these characters. But for Henry, I put changed because he was very much changed after his encounter with Luke and his perception of those relationships that he had. Romantic, and then I was struggling with 3 words for Henry, but I put type B because he kinda gives off this, like, golden retriever energy where he's go with the flow, just happy to be on the outskirts and do his thing.
Golden retriever energy is such a good way to describe him. I liked Henry's character. I didn't love Henry's character. In my opinion, he was not a very dynamic character, but he was okay. Like, I enjoyed his character for the most part. My 3 words for him were genuine, supportive, and naive.
And now moving on to Luke. This is where maybe I've read too many romanticises and I love a morally gray character, but the 3 words that I put for Luke were complex, toxic, and reserved. Because I do. I think there is a lot of layers to Luke, and that yes, he's obviously the villain in this story, very much so. There's no
Mhm.
disagreement with that. But I do think it is a little more complex, and there's some things behind him that God, I wish we could get into it. I want another book to do that.
I agree with you on toxic. I usually love a shadow daddy, but I love a shadow daddy who treats his woman like a queen. And this was not Luke. Luke is
Oh
just
yeah.
terrible. I hated his character. I'm going to put that out there. My 3 words for him were arrogant, possessive, and temperamental. Thank you.
Those are I mean, are they wrong? No. Should I probably be concerned about how much apology I give to Luke? Probably. Well, we'll dive into it, but I have some supporting evidence as to why I don't think Luke is as terrible as he is perceived by a lot of people. Does that mean he is not terrible? No, he is still pretty dang terrible. This is the point where we bring discussion questions forward that we can talk about and dive into with different points of the book. So, with our first discussion question, we want to know, did Addie and Luke love each other? Tegan, I want to know your thoughts.
This is a hard question to answer because love can be subjective, right? But this isn't a philosophy podcast, so I'll do my best. Um, I do believe that Luke loves Addie in the only way that he knew how to love someone, which was terribly, but she did not return that love for him. They have very different ideas of love. They're not compatible. Addie believes that love is selfless. She believes that if you love someone, you care about them more than you care about yourself. She believes that you give them the freedom to be who they are, to learn and grow and explore. Luke actually stated that he believes love is hungry and selfish. And multiple times he says to Addie, "You are mine." And he addresses her as my Adeline. So did he love her? Maybe, but not in a way that would ever allow her to feel loved.
Okay, I can see that. So I'm going to kind of counter that a little bit
Okay,
and
please.
say that yes, I do think that they loved each other, but in more of like I can't help it. I'm attracted to you. We have a connection, but this is entirely toxic kind of way.
Mhm.
So Luke sees like the dark parts of her, right? She grew up in early 18th century France to where she had to have a commitment, and that's the expectation of her is to marry, have kids and all of that. And that was not her. She was very progressive for her time. But in society that would be very taboo, and that's that dark side of her. And she wanted to explore. She wanted to be wild and carefree. She wanted to be a little selfish, and as understandably as she should be. And I think that Luke sees those parts of her that kind of go against the norm, are a little quote unquote dark. But it is a toxic thing. And I think your point on being able to feel loved is the other side of that. The way that we love each other is not compatible and is not reciprocated on the feeling side of it.
Okay, that's fair. Yes. Having love for someone and feeling loved by someone are different things.
Yeah, because I mean, they do. They obviously have got the hots for each other and love each other, but they should never be together.
But then I guess my question would be, is that love or is that just attachment?
There are things that he does, and I'll talk about this later on as we go through, but that go against his kind of terrible nature and makes me think that yes, it is love, but he's just unable to really be transparent about it and honest and actually what love should be versus what he feels like it is.
Something that I think would be cool if we had as readers was more backstory on Luke. Like, has he ever loved someone before? Has he ever been in a relationship? What is his romantic history?
I have marked this down in my notes so many times as I want another book solely for the background of like the god politics and all of this because there's got to be some sort of dynamic there.
So while we're on the topic of love and whether Addie and Luke loved each other, whether we want to call that love or attachment or whatever. Do you think there was a specific moment where their relationship shifted, or was it gradual?
I think it was more gradual, but I think Luke had a vested interest in her before she ever prayed to him, right? And my theory stems around her view of Luke and how he manifests. She pulled the view of Luke from the men in her life, the features that she liked of him. But as she drew this mysterious figure, it became more solidified in her mind. So it makes me wonder. My headcanon theory is that Luke has actually taken a vested interest in her as she's prayed to the other gods, and he's not answering because he's not the god she's praying to, but has taken this interest in her and is kind of like watching her from his side. And so when he had the opportunity to answer, that's why he did so quickly. But I do think that like that attraction and that dynamic between them slowly changed after the bargaining, because after just 1 year past the agreement is when he told her, when she was putting the powder on her face, "I would rather see the clouds blot out the stars." But he still asks for her soul in those moments, and leading every time they encounter on this
Mhm.
anniversary, asking for her soul. But I think I was looking back through, and I think the turning point, though, of this and him being a little more open in his feelings about whatever it may be for her was when he took her out of Paris in 1789. But he mentions that it's not kindness, but he wants to be the one to break her. But she can't die. Sure, the emotional and physical toll of war in Paris could break her, but she's already overcome a lot of things by then. So
Yeah.
I think that there was more protection on Luke's side for this, and that it was kind of this turning point. And after this point, he starts to talk to her more in terms of surrendering her soul a little more kindly, I guess is the best way to put it, right? Like, he talks about she let her rest, and put her next to a stele and put a tree over her bones instead of just like, "I'll make it easy and give me your soul." But on the flip side for Addie, I think that her attraction to Luke was definitely more gradual, and
Mhm.
at first was just a, "He's the only one who knows me and I'm lonely." But for her, just realized, like, oh, he is complicated as these interactions go on. Is he terrible? Yes, but he is complicated in that he is lonely too.
Yeah. It's interesting you said that about Luke possibly having an attraction to Addie before he even answered to her. That's not something I really thought about, but he mentions multiple times that he can always see her. He's always aware of what she's doing, even if she can't see him, even if he's not, physically present. He's there. He sees her and he knows what she's doing. In my mind, when I was reading that, that was because of the bond, the deal that they had made with each other. But perhaps that isn't the case. And maybe he's always been able to see her and has been aware of where she is and what she's doing.
And I'll say I never had that idea until my third reread, so it could totally just be an off the wall theory that I have. But man, I latched onto it and I really love it.
So I don't have a whole lot to say about Luke's interest in Addie and whether, when that started or whether it was always there, if it was a gradual change. I'm not really sure. I was really just turned off by the basic characters. So it was so hard for me to look at anything that he did as being, a loving gesture or something saying, like, hey, I'm interested in you. But for Addie, I think, like you said, it was definitely gradual. And I think it started New Year's Eve 99. Luke visited her because he was in Paris and there were things there that reminded him of her. So, in other words,
I had
he was
forgotten
saying he
about that.
missed her. Yeah. So I think that is when we see Addie initially let her guard down. And then in the mid 1900s, like 1952 to 1984, they have this like ongoing relationship that starts with Luke interrupting a date that she was having. And he's sort of shaming her, I guess, because she has gone on multiple dates with this person who can't remember her in between each date. And she says she's doing it because he keeps her company. Luke gets so jealous and he says that, he would keep her company if she wanted it. And he insists that he wants her. Addie accused him of only wanting her as a prize, an accusation he did not deny. But even then, Addie still kind of kept him at a distance. There was a part when they were living together and she placed her head on his chest to try to listen to his heartbeat, to listen to the sound of him breathing, which is a very intimate thing that I think most of us have done at some point or another in our relationships. But she says the only thing she could hear were the woods at night and the quiet hush of summer. I thought this was so poetically phrased because what she's saying is the only thing she heard was emptiness.
Oh, that is beautiful.
Yes. And then later on, they're in the middle of this love affair and she sees him collect a woman's soul. It's the first time she's seen that happen in decades. And it's sort of a reality check for her. Not enough for her to leave him, but enough that I think she put her wall back up a little bit again. And then in 1984, he asked her to surrender her soul again and shattered any bit of trust that she may have felt for him. Addie referred to this as their falling out, and she never trusted him or felt loving feelings for him again after that. It was like the final betrayal.
So here's my counter to that. And I had this point later on, but I think it's a good point to bring up now. So that moment was a pivotal moment for them, but that came after so much dynamic change between the two of them, right? They had finally started to let go of that animosity between each other, finally start to explore what that is. She lived contently with him for a long period of time. And then that switched when he talked to him about surrendering her soul again. But prior to that bringing up, he was telling her that he can make it better, right? Because she had said, if you love me, let me go. But he said, well, I can't change the bargain, which I want the freaking God politics of this because part of me thinks like his hands are tied and that part of that magic is that he literally can't change the bargain or undo the bargain. But he said, I can make it better. I can change terms. All you have to do is surrender. And at that point, it's about the trust between the two of them and shows that she still does not trust him because I think that because of the way the fallout happened and he genuinely was hurt by her words and then he put up that wall of, "Oh, you got me. I was playing you." And it's exhausting to play that part. I wonder if he actually was genuinely wanting to help her out and change the terms. Sure, he probably still would have done it a little selfishly, but she would have had to trust him to do that. And I think that is that moment where everything could have changed for the better for her, but because of their history together, it just never happened.
I hate to say that you're starting to convince me here, but
See, bring it to the dark side.
but this might be one of those moments where words are so important, right? And like
Mm-hmm.
maybe there's so much said in what's unsaid here. Because he doesn't say surrender your soul. He doesn't say give up your life. He says all you have to do is surrender. She
Yep.
thinks he's talking about her soul. But what if he's not? What if he's, like you said, what if he's saying surrender to me, surrender
Right.
your trust?
And so many of the other times previously, he talks about I'll make it painless, I'll make it easy, I'll bury you under the tree. But this is I can change the bargain. All you have to do is surrender.
So I've seen some theories out there, mostly from fans who are advocating for Addie and Luke to end up together and like have this relationship forever. Yes, I see you there. um, that if she does surrender to him, that he could make her a god as well or a goddess.
Oh, I didn't go that far down the road. To me, the way I've pictured this, now reading it 3 times, is that the magic system, once the bargain's made, it's made, right?
Right.
And the ending with for Henry, it's almost like she didn't renegotiate her current bargain. It's like she made a second bargain on top of her current bargain for Henry, right? So it kind of like is a new bargain that saves Henry but ties her to Luke's side. I am assuming that with this second bargain that the first one is still in place and she will still not be remembered by anyone she meets, even at Luke's side. So it makes me wonder if she was to trust him in this moment and give up and surrender, that he can take her soul and essentially make it better for her because ultimately it's his. And as a god, surely he can do whatever the hell he wants with it, right?
Yeah. There are a few times, though, where he says that once she surrenders, she'll be nothing. He's like, you'll be nothing, but I can make it better.
Yeah, it's just one of those things. This is why I want another book. I want to know. I want to
I
know all
know,
the.
I know.
I want to know all the nitty gritty of how that magic works.
There are so many questions unanswered.
And that's some of the beauty of this book is so much is open to interpretation, and that you can kind of picture your own version of what's happened after the ending.
Yeah.
I think this is a great segue into our next question about like what ways are Addie and Luke similar and what ways are they different? They both are very different in terms of like their personalities, right? Addie's more wild and carefree. Luke is more manipulative and stuck in his ways and being toxic. But they both talk about this and how they're both lonely. And she starts to see through Luke's facade essentially. And I think it makes me wonder if she sees through Luke and sees that he's kind of tired of the typical games and bargains that he plays and wants something different.
There was an interaction where Addie pointed out that she thought Luke was also lonely, and they're both similar in that they are both forgotten by mortals and trying to be remembered by someone. And I think it's during this interaction when Luke tells Addie that she knows him better than anyone else. Many, many, many years later, he brings up that conversation to her and admits that she was right, that they were both lonely. So they are very similar in that way and both looking to fill that loneliness with each other. I think they're very different in how they gain satisfaction. For Addie, it's more about the experience. She's curious. She wants to learn new things. She wants to see the world. She wants to experience art and meet people. So she spends her life traveling and studying. She interacts with the same people day in and day out. Even though it's like they're meeting her for the first time, it's a lot of effort, but these experiences are worth it to her. For Luke, it's less about the experience and it's more about what he gains in the end. He wants credit at the end. If he doesn't get credit, it's not worth it to him.
I think that's a fair assessment too, because there's points where he kind of almost acts disgusted by the art and views all of that as a waste. At one point is what he says, so I can see
Yeah.
that. We've talked a lot about Addie and Luke, but let's dive into Henry. Were you surprised to learn that Henry also made this deal with Luke?
Yes, I was surprised because when I first read this, my headcanon was that Henry was Luke, that Luke had taken on a human body and was like impersonating whoever this Henry person was so
Oh
that
my
he could
God.
get to Addie. Like he's that manipulative. I did not put it past him. So was I surprised that he made a deal with Luke? Like, no, I guess not. Was I surprised that he wasn't Luke? Yes.
Imagine if that had been the storyline. Oh my God.
I kind of wish it had been.
Same. Like, could you imagine that ending? Oh my God.
Yeah. However, even though I still feel like I was fairly accurate there because even though Luke wasn't embodying Henry, like Luke says that he put Henry in Addie's life intentionally, that he gave Henry to her so that she could experience love.
Was that surprising to you? Like, were you surprised? Because I wasn't surprised that Henry made a deal at this point. He's the only one. Luke's got to be involved somehow, right? But I was surprised, pleasantly surprised, that Luke stuck Henry in her path.
I was surprised that that was an intentional decision. I mean, call me naive, call me a hopeless romantic, like whatever, I guess. I was on the star-crossed lovers path, you know? I'm like, oh,
You mean with Henry and Addie?
yeah.
So, going with that, do you think Henry and Addie really loved each other?
I mean, at least they both felt loved while they were together. And I know, we've already talked about how like loving someone and feeling loved by someone are
I
totally
I
different things.
I would totally agree with that they felt love for each other.
But they cared for each other. They felt valued for who they are. And I don't know. I am all vibes, no thoughts here. So maybe I am just a hopeless romantic at heart.
I read through this book, and maybe it's because I just don't love Henry completely as much as I love Luke because of his complex dynamic and just how terrible he is. But I don't know if they truly loved each other. I do agree with you that they felt love from each other, but I do wonder how much of that was the novelty of being exempt from each other's curse, right? They don't, ultimately, they got to know each other for what, 4 months? Is that what that was? 4 months? 5 months? March to September?
Yeah. Mid-March to early September.
Right? So that's a very short period of time. And I do think that they felt love from each other and that they learned to care for one another. But as for was it love? I don't know. Addie even says this that she wishes the words were true when she says, I love you, after Henry says, I love you to her. So I think she even knows, like, I don't know if this is love or not.
Yeah. One thing that makes this a difficult question for me to answer is the way that things ended with Addie and Henry. Because Addie saved Henry, which is normally that selfless act of love that, oh, I would sacrifice myself to save you because I love you. However, there was the caveat that with this bargain, Henry would be able to remember Addie. Therefore, he was able to publish her story. She finally gets to leave a mark on the world. So she had something to gain from it. So did she save Henry because she was in love with him and selflessly sacrificed herself? Or did she save Henry because it was the only way that she could leave that mark?
And strike a new bargain to be able to potentially get away from Luke.
Yeah.
I think it's a good question to ask.
Addie bartered her soul because she didn't want to be stuck in a small town forever, tied down by a husband. In the end, she tied herself to Luke, who is essentially a man, to save Henry, another man. So, how is this different?
I think this comes down to choice, right? She didn't have a choice in her early days of early 18th century France. That was the expectation. And she was basically dragging her feet to the wedding. She was being forced at this point that you are going through with it and it is going to happen. Whereas this situation with Henry was a choice and she decided that she would do this for him.
I also agree that it is different. First of all, she got to experience the world for 300 years rather than spending her entire life in a small town. And the other thing that I think is really different here is that she's tying herself to Luke temporarily. She was changing the rules of the game so that she could eventually become free. Her idea here is that she will stay by Luke's side as long as he wants her by his side. So her plan is basically to drive him nuts until he doesn't want her anymore, and then she'll be free.
I want that book so bad. Like, what do you think has happened now for Addie and Luke?
Look, Luke is so temperamental. I believe Addie eventually pisses him off, and even if he didn't fully mean it, there was a moment where he was like, I am fed up with you, be gone, and then couldn't take it back because that was the deal.
This is why I want a second book. So I think she gets away. Like she knows how to push his buttons after 300
She really
years. Like she
does.
does.
Along those lines, yes. She talks about how she has even learned what the different shades of his eye color mean and can gauge his emotional reactions based upon that. And toward the end of the book, she even points out that he has not learned to read her in that way. So this is really the first time that Addie has the upper hand.
Okay, so going with endings, I want to know from you, what do you think happened with Henry after his book being published?
Okay, I said I like Henry, and I'm standing by it. I do like Henry. But I
But I
think
brought you
what
to the dark side, I know.
but I think what happened to Henry after this is he lived a normal life.
I think he, like, uses the money, he buys the shop, and he just continues to run it. It sounded like the book was a big hit. Maybe he gets a movie deal and is like, "I'll continue Addie's story that way," and tries to help her leave a mark, but ultimately, like, yeah, he just kinda goes on to live a normal life, and this is why I kind of get mad at Henry is because Addie did a big thing for him, and I don't
Mhm.
know if he would do the same thing for her. I just am
I
not
think he
convinced of it.
would have. I think he would have.
Let me rephrase that. Not that he wouldn't do the same thing for her, but I don't think he's gonna go pursue to try to find her or try to fix it or try to get her out of a bargain. I think he's happy to say, you know what? Thank you so much for your sacrifice. I love you. And I will just honor that by staying here. And
That's true. Yeah, I think if the roles were reversed, Henry would have done that for her. However, once she made her bargain, you're right. I don't think Henry's doing anything to try to find her, figure out what happened.
so now that we've read the book a few different times, me three, you two, what would you say of all of Addie's travels and everywhere she was at and all of her interactions? What was your favorite influence that she had or her favorite travel in the book?
I loved that she was a spy during World War II. She knew
Same.
all of these different languages, and I thought it was so cool. She went into that thinking she was going to be so useful as a spy because no one would remember her, that, she could kind of go back and forth as this fresh new face, a stranger each time. But after she was captured, she learned that that didn't matter because nobody was recognizable. No one was trying to remember a traitor. And I thought that was one of the most normal moments that Addie had in all of her existence. I feel like there could have been an entire novel written just about her
Yes.
experiences doing that.
I wrote the same thing. I wrote, in my notes, I wrote, I want a novella about this, just this little snippet in time and being a spy.
That's amazing. I love that without even talking about it, we both had the same favorite moment.
I know. It was,
For
I mean, right? Then again, you tell me you're a spy, and I'm like, oh, what? Huh? I want to read that.
Yeah, for as much as we disagree, it's amazing how much we think alike sometimes.
We're each other's soulmates. We know this. It's fine.
Yes. Your
So,
cynicism always brings me back down to earth.
and you help pump me up in my really sad moment. So, for our last question, this is just the broad question that everyone always asks each other when you read a book. What was your favorite moment? What did you love the most?
I'm outing myself as a hopeless romantic yet again. My favorite moment was when Henry and Addie went to the interactive art exhibit together. Addie was trying to draw, and within seconds, whatever she drew had disappeared. So Henry came up with this ingenious idea where he placed her hand on top of his, and she guided his hand to draw what she wanted to draw. It was so sweet and beautiful.
I will 100% agree with that. That was a top moment for me.
But
I
not your
also
favorite.
loved, not my favorite, but it was a very top 3 moment for me. The other one being, right before that when they are doing the Polaroid pictures and they ultimately get a picture of her feet. It was just that little moment of defiance that was a big moment for me. I'd say that was number 2, but number 1 for me was the penultimate moment with her and Luke in New Orleans, and that complex dynamic of I can change the terms, all you have to do is surrender, and her not trusting that, and maybe rightfully so. So, oh god, it's heartbreaking, it's complex, it makes you wonder and question everything, and that's why it's my favorite moment.
Yes, so many great moments in this book, so many good interactions. I don't know how you narrowed it down to just 3.
It was hard.
Yes.
It's such a beautiful book. Just heartbreaking, heart-wrenching, all the heart things. I highly recommend anyone who hasn't read this book, even if we've spoiled it for you, give it a read. The writing and the prose is gorgeous. Well, that is all we have for our discussion today. Thank you so much for joining us. We are just thrilled to be offering this podcast to you guys, and we look forward to continuing it. We would love to hear your thoughts on The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. Let us know. If you want to connect with us, please consider following us on social media. We are on TikTok and Instagram with the handle at Influenced Book Podcast. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please take a moment to rate us wherever you get your podcasts.
Yes, thank you all so much for being here, for listening to us go on our tangents. We really look forward to our next episode when we will be discussing Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross. So until next time, happy reading!